Welcome back to the program. Egypt's struggle with democracy centers on the nature of the state itself. Whether the new draft constitution that was rushed through in the dead of night this weekend will put power in the hands of the people, as in most democracies, or will power come from God? Before President Morsi was elected, this is what he told me on this program.
Rights will be based on the constitution. So all Egyptians, whether Muslims or Christians, men or women, everyone and all will agree to it and will themselves call for it in the Constitution. And that means there is no need for worry at all over any kind of abuse of power. It will be impossible to allow these kinds of abuse in the shadow of a constitutional state, a lawful state, a state that protects the dignity of a person.
Only, of course, there has been a lot of worries since November 22nd, not just about the Constitution, but about a possible abuse of power by the president. Demonstrators on the street are raising serious questions about President Morsi's commitment. For his part, the president promises that his emergency decree will soon be lifted, that it was necessary because Mubarak-era courts had already dissolved parliament and disbanded the first constitutional committee last June in what was then called a soft coup. Joining me now to discuss Egypt's rocky transition to democracy is Prime Minister Hisham Kandil. Prime Minister, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me in your show.
Let me start by asking you, and I meant to say welcome back to this program. Let me start by asking you whether you think this referendum that's apparently scheduled for December 15th is going to quiet the storm, is going to suddenly miraculously calm things down.
Well, if you look at the recent history since the revolution, during this transitional period, always before we have any important step, like the one we have, a major step, a historic one, that we will have the constitution that we all have been looking for. Usually, people from both sides will want to have their voices heard, but we certainly hope that things will quiet down after the referendum is completed. And then we move to the next step toward building another democratic institution, which must be the last one in completing the democratic system that we are aiming for.
Prime Minister, you seem to be saying that democracy is playing out on the streets and none of us should worry about anything. But of course, President Morsi, as we all know, has given himself these emergency powers. So the question is, will that decree be lifted once this constitution passes? When will the decree be lifted?
Okay, I mean, I hope you don't get my point that I'm not worried. Of course I'm worried. I'm worried about people rallying in the street. I'm worried about their safety. I'm worried that they all go home to their families. This is something that we worry about. This is New Egypt. This is New Egypt where the police is really protecting its people while they're doing peaceful demonstrations. This is the New Egypt that we all looking forward to be like the model, a model for the Arab Spring. So we definitely worry about what's happening. But let me come to your question about the decree. The whole essence of this decree was to protect the process of building the democratic institutions. So by training, I'm an engineer. I'm not going to go in a word by word about the declaration, but the essence of the declaration is extremely important. It is very clear. And President Morsi made it also repeatedly many times that this is what he meant to be. This is what is behind the declaration. And he gave assurance to all the opposition parties that there is no abuse of power. This is not a new dictatorship. And this declaration, and the previous ones as well, will fall immediately after the referendum. So it is. We're talking about remaining of now, after 1 hour from local time, he will be remaining only 12 days till this declaration drop. So I don't think people should worry about the declaration. We should now worry about what is coming as the Constitution.
Well, that was going to be my next question, because the Constitution is worrying a lot of people. As you know very well, sir, this was a very divided election. You know, you had practically half and half voting for President Morsi and half voting for, frankly, a much more secular opposition. People are worried about the new constitution and whether it puts the law in the hands of God, in the hands of the clerics. And let me read you why. Because there is a line that says, scholars of Al-Azhar, which is the big mosque, should be consulted in all matters relating to Sharia law. That is an addition. So what does that mean to people who are afraid that this is, you know, a masquerade for Islamism to rule Egypt?
Well, I think that this constitution it's a balanced one, and it is not putting the law, the power of the law in the hands of God, as you're saying, and what you're referring to the clause that you're referring to is talking about consultation of interpretation of the Sharia law. It is not compulsory that the legislators will abide to what the Al-Azhar will mention to them. It is a consultative role. It's in the power of people. The people will vote for this constitution. They will vote for their own new constitution that they wrote. Their representatives, their elected representatives, prepare this for them, and now it is time for them to study, read, make their decision, educated one, I hope, and then go for the referendum in 12 days.
Okay, you said that you were worried about what's going on the streets. You're worried for the safety of people. But, I mean, are you not worried precisely about the interpretation? That's what people are worried about. What does that mean, the interpretation? What does that mean, consultative role for the clerics? What does this additional new proposal mean in real life? You're saying it's not binding, but as you know very well, interpretation has always been the devil in the details.
Well, I'm worrying about many things, I tell you, not just the people in the street, nor the interpretation of the Constitution. I worry about the implementation, because really action is what counts, not just the words. And I worry about development, and I worry about women, I worry about the poverty, I worry about the economic growth. And I think the Constitution, as it is, provides a good framework for development. It provides, guidelines for us about what to focus in the future, and I think is good enough for us to proceed. This is my view. We have a text that is no way a perfect text. It is not difficult. It's impossible to have a perfect text that everybody agreed to. But there's what it's called. There's a consensus, and there's what is called a majority consensus. So for this constitution, I think there's a majority consensus to move forward with the referendum. Now, in 2 weeks, we'll find out what the Egyptian people think of this constitution.
Mm-hmm. And again, not to keep hammering a point, but as you know, so many people resigned from the Constitutional Assembly, women, Christians, etc. And you mentioned women, and I want to play you something that President Morsi said before he was president, and he actually departed from his customary Arabic to make his point.
Yeah, loudly and clearly, all Egyptian women have the same rights like the men. They are all my sisters, my daughters, my wife, and my mother. They are all Egyptians. There is no differences whatsoever among the people in Egypt, the people of Egypt, based on anything like belief or sex or whatever you call or you name.
So let's focus on the women. The Constitution hasn't changed a huge amount regarding women since the previous one, but nor are there any specific guarantees for universal women's rights. Are you sure that they will be respected?
Well, I mean, but let me address first the first issues that people that withdrawn out of the Constitution Assembly the last minute. I mean, withdrawing out of the assembly at the last minute does not mean that they left out with the text they put, or the suggestion that they put in the Constitution. So whatever they suggested, and during the discussion there was an agreement to put in the Constitution, it stayed there. So people left, but the text they agreed upon was there. So this is important to note. So unfortunately, regrettably, I would have loved to have everybody in the celebration of handing out the Constitution to the president. But you know, it's almost impossible to get what you want all the time. But in terms of women, if you read the preamble, I'm not sure whether they're quoting President Morsi or they listened to this quote somewhere else, but really this is exactly what they were saying at the preamble, that the women and men are equal and they have the same rights and obligations. And if you read the various clauses in the Constitution itself, it doesn't talk about men, it talks about Egyptian people, including men and women. So, and there's expansion in the rights of the people and the protection of the freedom of the Egyptian people in this constitution from the previous one. And again, implementation and action on the ground is the most important one.
I just have to ask you one final question, and it's obviously about the Palestinians and Israelis. Following this UN vote, the Israeli government has said that they will order and commence building new settlements in a particularly sensitive issue of Jerusalem. Briefly, will that cause you to review your agreement, your peace deal with Egypt? With Israel? What's your reaction?
No, definitely we're against the settlement in the occupied territories. This is something that we have always opposed, and I guess the rest of the world is also have the same view, because you can never negotiate on a piece of land while one party is changing the facts on the ground. So this is obviously, we're against that. We're condemning this. We're communicating with all sides, because having peace in the region is in the interest of both parties, but it's also in the interest of the Egyptian and the Arab world. And my visit to Gaza during the Israeli aggression on the sector was an evidence that how Egypt is committed to bringing peace to the region.
Prime Minister, thank you very much indeed for joining me. And when we come back, we will have a final note.